And good morning. Welcome to the 2025 Northwest Interlibrary Loan and Resource Sharing Conference. Today is September 11, 2025. And I welcome to the session of navigating workflow integration between Docline and Tipasa. Your presenter will be Megan Horn. I will be, my name is Marta Ambrosiak, and I am the convener for this session. Please let us know if you cannot hear or cannot see the shared screen. The session is being recorded with permission from the presenter. We plan to make this recording available about 2 to 3 weeks after the conference, and we will be sending the email when the recordings are ready. Please take we will take the questions after the session, and please don't forget to complete the survey. And I will give you Megan.
Hi. All right. So I'm not even offended that a lot of people left, because I've been turned down for this presentation before because I've been told it's too niche of a category, that because it's Docline, because it's Tipasa, we don't, there's not a lot of people who are in our boat. So as she said, I'm Megan Horn. I'm the Electronic Resources and Acquisitions Librarian at the University of North Texas Health Science Center at Fort Worth. And then Sky Allred is the library technician I work with. He was actually here, but him and his wife are looking at colleges this weekend, so he had to fly out before their son. So he flew out this morning, so we knew he wasn't going to be presenting with me. Just a little bit of background. So we are called UNT Health. We actually just rebranded from UNT HSC, where we called ourselves HSC like a month ago. So I will probably call us HSC a lot during the presentation. We are a small library staff. We are a medical school, specifically osteopathic medicine. So we have other things within our school, DPT, public health, PA. We just hired in a nursing program last fall. We'll be doing nutrition next year. So, small medical school underneath the UNT system umbrella, but everything we have, resources, ILS, everything's separate from the main campus in Denton. So we only have 28 full-time library staff. About 2 of them are part-time, I believe, and then 2.5 are ILL. So I supervise the ILL. Sky is the technician who does the day-to-day of ILL, and then the half would be our metadata technician, who she fills in specifically for Docline on days that Sky has prearranged absences. So that's why it's like 2.5. She does not cover Tipasa. I do on those days. And within all those staff, the whole 30 of us, we cover the Lewis Library, the main campus, which is the building behind the trees in the picture. We have the Region 3 for the NNLM on our campus. They are mostly remote, but their executive director is housed on our site. And then we also staff the John Peter Smith Hospital in Fort Worth, which is the county hospital. So their library staff is our library staff that we, but their resources are separate. So it is the staff, though, that we give them, or hire for them, I guess I should say. And then our FTE is also very small. We have only about 2,300 students. And I think this number was, as of last year's October 2024, did not include nursing for some reason, but we did start at the nursing cohort last year. And I believe we started our second cohort this year. But our numbers don't change year to year because we only have so many students that we can allow in with our programs. So our number just never fluctuates. And then we have about 1,500 faculty and staff that we work with. So this is what we're looking at when it comes to our ILL. So our ILL numbers, I don't have stats in this presentation, but they're actually pretty small from what I've heard from everybody else during these presentations. I would say, based on, because I did look at the stats, but nothing was crazy enough to include in the presentation. We do about So fulfilling, lending, borrowing, all that, it's about $1,000 a year. But when you add in document delivery, because we get a lot of requests for our own stuff, I'd probably double it in half because we are sending them a lot of stuff. It's just our stuff. So, that's why we only have the staff members that we have, and only one of our staff members is full-time, day-to-day, everyday ILL. All right, so this session is about how our library successfully developed a functional workflow between Docline and Tipasa, despite the lack of conventional integration. So what that means is there is no actual integration between the two. What we have is a workaround integration. And for anyone who has worked with Docline and has Illiad, you'll understand what I mean, because Illiad integrates Docline. You do everything right there in the desktop client, So we decided to transition from Illiad to Tipasa. We became WMS users in 2020, so we decided to do that transition also. And we were faced challenges managing the request across both systems. At the time, we thought it would be more of a challenge, and that's part of why I wanted to do the presentation. So I'm going to share how our ILL staff bridged the gap between the specialized medical resource sharing we do, other ILL resource sharing we do, just to make sure we were better serving our users, but also it was for us too, as the staff behind the scenes. So just a background, stuff that's not on this slide. So I started working in libraries. I was an elementary school teacher for over a decade, and I moved to Texas, wanted to change, started working in libraries the minute I moved, so 2015. And I started doing ILL pretty immediately. In 2016, the library I worked for switched from one system, CRC, to WMS. And so I got the switch was immediate. Like I started working, we migrated. And so WMS was what I was used to. I was used to that interface. We didn't have Tipasa, but I'm also not sure Tipasa existed yet, but it was that interface in the ILL module. So that's what I was used to. In 2019, I moved to UNT Health to be a library technician. And I only got a week of training on Illiad. So the person who was doing it, he also was not the ILL person. The ILL person had just left. So he had trained himself to use Illiad, and then he gave me a week of training on Illiad, and all I had was a one-page Word document with bullet points. And so I had to basically teach myself Illiad. And I can't even tell you now because it's been 5 years and 2 babies. And so my memory is just like, whew. I have a vague memory of Illiad. Like I can picture that screen, but I can't tell you that I could sit down and go back through the workflow again. But I spent a year and a half on the workflow of Illiad. And going from WMS to Illiad, I wasn't a fan. I wasn't a desktop client person. It was also too IT for me because I was an elementary school teacher and then I was library. And, so I wasn't working. But here's the thing though, Illiad had that strong Docline integration. So I didn't know any different. That was my first time being thrown into Illiad and first time with Docline. So it's just what I knew. It wasn't connected to WMS in the way that we are now. So those of you that use Illiad, which on this conference I found is a lot of people, you'll know what you have the connections. We had all the scripts, which I actually forgot what that word was until last week. I asked our metadata librarian, like, hey, what were those things that we had to use with Illiad? That every time I had to update the client and we had to add in, him and I both sat there for a minute and he finally came up with the word because it just had been so long. So, just all these things. So pre-2021, we migrated to WMS during that time. So we actually had WMS starting in 2020. We did the migration during COVID. We were all working from home at that point. We'd already started it before COVID, continued it. And by September 2020, we were WMS, everything except our ILL. So then I'm doing ILL in Illiad, but I still have to go to Docline for stuff directly because something malfunctioned. Then I'm doing Odyssey to do the articles, but then I'm freezing Odyssey for the articles. So then I'm also going into Article Exchange. But I'm also going into the ILL module in WMS for a variety of things too. So I found myself just using multiple platforms anyways. So I didn't understand the whole confusion, like it doesn't integrate. Well, that's fine because I am already clicking on multiple different screens. So we just also then wanted that more user-friendly interface. And we wanted an ILL system that integrated, but then we realized we're just not going to get everything we want. So during COVID, the working remotely really did start to cause workflow challenges. I was struggling sometimes when there'd be an update needed. Illiad hasn't functioned well for 2 days. What could it be? Okay, I reached out to my systems librarian. He was the one that was a pro at stuff. He also didn't even do ILL, but he knew what he was doing with Illiad. And we live an hour and a half from each other. So he would do what he could over the phone, over I don't even think we were using Teams at the time. I forget what we were using. Now it's Teams, but he would help me the way he could, as much as he could, but there was challenges there. So we started to explore, okay, well, we have WMS. Can't we just do WMS? Can't we just use the ILL module? And not just that, we wanted to upgrade to Tipasa. So we started exploring that. We were looking at the cost savings that, because we had Illiad, but we also had other things we were using, in place of it, well, like with it. So we started looking at, I actually started doing ILLs in Illiad, in the ILL module. So it wasn't Tipasa yet. There's some more bells and whistles with the WMS Tipasa than the ILL has. I started doing some ILLs in there directly. Then I started doing some ILLs directly in Docline. I was like, you know what? We can do this, because we knew there was no integration. So I started testing it out and doing them in the separate systems before we ever even migrated, just to see, could we do this? I think so. And then we just knew we had to redesign our workflow, though, to make sure that, okay, we're still meeting the medical needs of our users. Now, because it wasn't just us and our users, it was the other libraries that we're in consortiums with that are Illiad users and Docline users. They were a little concerned of, well, if you switch, are you still going to do Docline? Because, we don't want to lose you as a lender. We don't want to lose you as a borrower. Are we still going to have that connection? Are we going to still have yes, we had no plans to leave Docline, but there was that concern with a couple of stakeholders when it comes to us being a lender and even a borrower. Are we still participating? Yes, we are, and we do still have some general ILLs too, because the only way we could do print, we don't do print in Docline. And I honestly can't tell you why. We just don't. But then the other thing that we started to look at was the imminent retirement of my systems librarian, the one person who would always help me with Illiad when I was not working well with it. I knew I could reach out to the vendor. I wanted to do it in-house. I wanted to solve the problem, but it was never just me solving the problem. It was Mike, my systems librarian. Well, I knew his retirement was coming. So it was even more important than get us off of the thing that we need Mike for, that we can do ourselves. So initial challenges, which I've kind of already talked about, we knew we were going to lose the Docline integration. And I'm going to tell you now that at the time, these were the challenges we saw. Knowing what we know now and how we're experiencing now, they're not challenges. But these were also not just our concerns. It was the concerns of other libraries who used Illiad and Docline. They were concerned for us. You're not going to be integrated anymore. Managing it in two systems. So not only are we logging into Tipasa, we're now logging into Docline. But as I said, I found myself doing that already before we ever migrated. I realized I'm already logging into like 4 separate things to sometimes get this done because some things are malfunctioning. We had to update the manual because I don't know if anyone else has this, but we have a manual for ILL, which we learned to do when I was at my other institution, and the ILL person literally fell down a hill, was on medical leave for a year. He was the only person who knew ILL at that institution. So then my director said, here, you're learning ILL. So that's how I learned ILL and WMS. Then I had to learn Illiad, So, and there was no manual for that. So basically we have a manual now and we keep it up to date just in case something like that were to happen again, where someone needs to know how to do it off the bat. We just have to know how to do it. So we had to do new screenshots, new instructions, not just for one system, but now we're doing it Tipasa, Docline. How do we put the manual together in a way that makes sense? Also, this coincided with staff transition. I was leaving. I had gotten my library degree. Even though I was pushing for this migration, we migrated on September 1st, 2021 for ILL. I started my new job September 1st, 2021. So I actually had to start all the documentation prep and all the training that I could do back in like May 2021 when we knew this was going to happen. So just added to the workflow, which was ultimately okay. And I had the ability to actually train the person who was taking over, Sky. So, and the nice thing for him was he only got trained on Tipasa and Docline. I didn't have to train him on Illiad. We just didn't even bother because we knew I'm gone August 31st. Tipasa's live September 1st. We're not even going to bother training him on Illiad. So we didn't, and it didn't matter. And then just that initial concern of the split workflow, and I know we had some people in the library, some of our administrative admin people, they just wanted to make sure we're okay with this, right? You don't have this one system anymore. And we had explained to them, yeah, but we're already have multiple systems. So yeah, we don't have a unified system now. We're doing it in 2 different places, but it's going to be okay. So workflow goals. We're to ensure the ensure efficiency for the ILL staff. And this was especially since I was leaving. I wanted to make sure that It'd be okay for Sky. He'd know what he was doing. The nice thing is the person who was my supervisor, that would now be Sky's supervisor, she came from the same institution I did before. She was my supervisor at my other place. So she already knew WMS, and she actually was my backup for ILL at the other place. So she already knew all this. She just had to train herself on Docline. Make sure it's a seamless experience, though, for the users. We didn't want them to have any problems with request. The ones who were used to a different form, we didn't want them to get confused in that. The login would be different for our outside patrons, because we do have unaffiliated patrons. So we have an SSO for all of our affiliated patrons with WMS. So that was easy for them. They don't have a separate login anymore. They just log in with their username and password. Great. Our outside affiliates, though, we knew this was happening. So in like June, we started making accounts for them in WMS, because we already had WMS for like a year. So we make their accounts. We send them instructions on how to log into this new account. We got them started on the new ILL process way ahead of schedule, so that we could work out any of the kinks that we had. We even started, I think, in June. I almost stopped doing Illiad completely somewhere around June, July, just to make sure, because I could still do ILL and WMS. It just, like I said, some bells and whistles were missing. So I just started doing ILL in both systems to prepare for this, to make sure that all the kinks were worked out, to make sure that that manual was up to date for when my replacement had to start completely from scratch, so that he wasn't really. And it also helped us make sure that our ILL processes were all aligned in the WMS environment. And this isn't all just Docline related, because there's just other stuff, physical items. You know, now we're getting our physical request in, which we do a lot less since COVID. But if we're lending or, borrowing, especially the borrowing, you say you got the book, boom, there's already a record ready in WMS now. And all we have to do is stick it in our lockers that we got during COVID, and they pick it up and it checks it out to them. So it made a smooth transition for everything else too. We didn't have to create a record, because we got it through Illiad, then we had to go create the record. Now we had a temp record. So it just made other stuff work out well for us too, when we look past just the Docline integration piece. But we also had a goal to make sure that Docline stayed relevant for us, not just for us, but for all of our consortium librarians too, because we have a group at SCAML. I'm going to say it completely wrong. South Central Academic Medical Libraries, something association in there. So, and it's a group of us, and we even have a conference every fall. And so we wanted to still make sure that we were still lending. Hospitals, we're also part of one called Healthline. We have some hospitals that I think they route it only to us based on, my experience since 2019 with this. Because I came back to HSC in January 2023, when this position opened up. So, and when I came back and I was covering ILL, everything was smooth. And then I was seeing some of our regular requesters coming through Docline still. It didn't change anything. And that was one of our goals. We just wanted the whole process to be smooth, but we didn't want it to change anything in our lending and our borrowing. And overall, it didn't. So building the new workflow, this was one thing though we talked about with OCLC, and they knew what our concern was. We were migrating no matter what, but they knew that one of our biggest concerns was the integration or the lack thereof. So they actually came to us and said, okay, well, we have a workaround so that you can still do everything in Tipasa. Well, almost everything. So the way it works is, and I did not use screenshots because there was like small print on one of OCLC's about getting permission from OGC. And I just decided, you know what? I don't have time. I could check with our OCLC rep to see if I really have to do this, but I'm just going to do this without screenshots. So we get our request in through Tipasa. All of our users request through Tipasa. If they're an affiliated or affiliated, no matter what, their request routes in Tipasa, not Docline. So we get it, and honestly, we look at it. If it's medical related, electronic, and medical related, we pretty much go through Docline for it, because there's a variety of reasons that I will talk about. I don't want to talk about it more than multiple times, but there are reasons that we direct route those through Docline if possible. If it is not medical related, I might still look. If there's a Docline library that has those holdings, but otherwise I route it through Tipasa. And we're part of the OCLC, I'm not going to use Express. So we use that. Physical items, we only route through Tipasa. So we have that initial decision, Tipasa versus Docline. And I have talked to Sky, my library technician, because he'd kind of get away from Docline a little bit in that period of time I was gone. And so kind of worked our way. And he used it, just not as much as, I would have, liked to seen it used. So we worked our way back to using it more often again. And so one of the things that makes it easier for borrowing, and we look at the metadata, PubMed ID, DOI, ISSN. I prefer the PubMed ID. That's the PMID. If it's not on the request already, I just copy and paste the title into Google, and my computer knows me now. And if it has a PubMed, it pops it up as like the first choice. If it doesn't pop up, I still try to look, but I usually know I'm not going to find it. But ISSN is my next go-to, so it really, the clicks aren't that much more, because part of the concern was working in two different things, Well, yeah, but now you have to go to PubMed. You could just click this button and submit it through Tipasa, no problem. I'm like, yeah, but Docline sometimes just faster, and I click because it's medical. A lot of them are just medical. They're used to providing medical professionals with articles. So they try to do it pretty fast, and one of the other things with it, it's probably going to pop up on my thing and I'll talk about it already. But with Docline, it doesn't route it if the library doesn't have it, if they're not open, a temporary hold on their, like not temporary hold, but temporarily deactivated. Basically, if they're not open and they don't have it, it doesn't route it. All right. So, and it doesn't go for like after hours. So like we're open Monday through Friday. So we only get Docline routed Monday through Friday. Docline has our hours. I'm not going to get a request over the weekend. So that way it doesn't route it to someone who's closed if you're expecting a quick turnaround. Technically, we have 24 hours. And if it doesn't route within 24 hours, or if it doesn't get filled within 24 hours, Docline will automatically reroute it to the next library. Whereas when I do it through Tipasa, it's usually like it could sit, I've had it sit for like 7 days with one lender, and so, and that's one of the other reasons, oh, that's a medical journal. Why didn't we send that through Docline? Let's send it through Docline. So that is one thing. And it's just the lenders, and then there's those lenders, in Tipasa also, like the OCLC symbols. I know which symbols to pick because I know who's going to give it to us and who's going to give it to us quickly, but Docline does the same thing. So I do try to rely on the medical there when they're filled in Tipasa. With lending in Docline specifically, comes in through Docline, our lending, because we still get lending requests through Docline. I have to go out to our catalog to look for it. But here's the thing, our holdings have to be manually updated in Docline. It does not pull from our catalog. It doesn't pull from what we say we have. It doesn't pull from like CINAHL, Medline, things that have embargoes. We tell Docline what we have. We have to go in there, type it in, tell it what holdings we have, tell it if there's an embargo. So other libraries do that too. That's how we know it's going to be accurate and that we're going to get it probably, 9 times out of 10. So lending requests, we're getting one. We most likely have it because, same thing, 9 times out of 10. If we're getting requests for something, we have it. If we don't, it sends me on a journey to figure out why. And then I can change our holdings. So I get it out of our catalog. I cannot send it through Docline though. Docline does not have that capability. So that's another reason, they like using Illiad because you have the other abilities to send it. I go to Article Exchange. I'm in Tipasa already. I just click on Article Exchange, upload the article there, click the email button and send it. So it really isn't that much more work. Yeah, it's a workaround, but it's just a few extra clicks. But once you get doing it, you're used to it, muscle memory. Now that's for lending in Docline. That's how I do it. Now, if it's a lending request that comes in through Tipasa, I only do it in Tipasa. So the lending stays pretty separate. The only reason I have to use OCLC for lending with Docline is because there's no way to send the article through Docline without using Article Exchange. And then Docline access, like I said, it's still required. So we still place our borrowing request if we choose to, and we still have to manage the lending requests that Docline library send us through Docline. All right. And then honestly, the workflow success, as I mentioned, the metadata quality, PubMed is preferred, the ID. If it's not there, it's okay. We can still do it. But that is the only thing that holds up this process. Because I would say that now that we're in the rhythm and we know what we're doing, we've been doing it for years, less than a minute is what it takes. And we don't have any. Like I said, we get like 2,000 requests a little over a year. 1,000 of them are actual real requests for filling and stuff and borrowing. I actually had one right before I was presenting because I'm keeping an eye on ILL today while Sky's flying. It took me 4 minutes to do, a little less than 4 minutes. But what happened was it was a request. It had like no metadata. The journal title was down in up in the article title, and the article title was in the journal title. It was mixed around. So I honestly had to go find this. Like, okay, well, it had no page numbers, nothing, and no PubMed ID. And it actually doesn't have a PubMed ID. So this one took me a little bit longer to do. So those are few and far between that we get an article like that. We get a request like that that's not filled out properly, but then like the article doesn't have enough metadata. I got the ISSN, went into Docline, went through this whole process in the borrowing that I mentioned, and it took me 3 minutes and 56 seconds. That doesn't happen often. Typically, like I said, less than a minute with what we're used to now. And the one thing that, also makes it easy and the workflow successful is, does Docline have a holding for it? If not, we go into Tipasa. And if neither of them have a holding for it, well, that rarely happens. And that sets us on a whole nother journey. So I'm not going to go through this, but this is basically just the workflow I talked about. And it doesn't look that complicated because it really isn't. And our manual lays this out. I think our manual, it's probably up to 130 pages now, way more complicated. All right, so why does this work? And I'm hoping that this presentation will be useful for anyone who was Docline and might want to be Docline again, and they left because they couldn't maintain the two or didn't want to maintain the two separate things. Or like our experiences of libraries who are with Illiad and they want to move to like Tipasa or something. They have an ILS that has that ILL module, but they are, once again, the integration. Well, this works for us because we like still doing it. We like not leaving because we were going to go to Tipasa no matter what. We're WMS customers. We like that we stayed with Docline because of the fast delivery. We have had doctors that work with us, and because our faculty are still doctors, and then we have residents, and they've told us, hey, I need this article because my patient's having surgery. They're having surgery in the morning. Can you get me this article? I can almost guarantee I'm going to get it when I submit it through Docline on a day that someone's open. Whereas if I did it through Tipasa, those libraries, they might not get it to me that day. And I will say it's not always, but I don't like taking that chance on the medical stuff, accurate holdings in Docline because they're manually maintained. I did find, like with Tipasa, the computer can't always tell with embargoes. We do look at before we request from a library in Tipasa, we do look at what their holdings are and what the years are before we click yes on getting them. We do it manually still. Even though we have an automated list that we can generate, we still click yes manually because we want to make sure that we're requesting it from someone who does say that they have that year. So honestly, that requires more effort to click on yes than if we were to just submit it through Docline and just place order. Preferred per Tipasa interface. So, and this goes back to, and that is a bias for me, especially. I went from WMS to Illiad and back to WMS. So it was a bias for me. I knew WMS for years before I met Illiad, and I was very happy to go back to WMS's interface. The smooth metadata use. So as I mentioned, I can do this in either, even if we were still in Illiad. It's just, that's part of why it works for us with that metadata use. Improve staff experience post-migration. I did not argue with my computer as much. I did not have to get frustrated as much. I just am not a desktop client person. And I will say that I am pretty dang sure our ILS before WMS was also a desktop client. And, switching to a cloud-based is just a lot easier and preferred. So the experience post-migration, it wasn't as much technical issues for me. And then Tipasa circulation integration, this has nothing to do with Docline again, but it just simplified the checkout of physical items for us, especially when we added in that locker that is all integrated into WMS also. And just some lessons we learned, workflow flexibility matters. And this was something that was the concern before migrating, which is why some didn't want to migrate. It doesn't integrate. It's okay. We weren't worried about it. And well, I wasn't worried about it. And I was the one doing ILL. And we're still not worried about it. It works for us. Staff adaptability is key. If you're not adaptable, and I found that the people who were most worried about the migration with no integration were the ones who'd been doing it the longest, who were more familiar with this one system that they had been using with ILL for the longest time, and they didn't know any different. So maybe that's why it was easier for me to switch, because I knew different and I knew what I could use and I knew how I could make it work. Because I will say we got a lot of concern from other libraries who were Illiad users, and it worked out. And the interface definitely impacts usability. And like I said, this could just be a me thing, a bias, but the interface was just, it made it easier to do my job in Tipasa, and it was worth it to have those couple extra clicks in Docline. Metadata is powerful. I knew this already, so not something I learned at my previous institution where I was doing ILL. I didn't think about it that much. And then switching to a medical library getting half the time I'd get a citation that was hardly a citation. They pulled a citation off somebody's CV that they saw was a doctor at this conference or who helped this patient on this one thing. And all they give me is a title, maybe a year, maybe part of an author's name. So I started learning how important metadata really was with all of this too. Especially once I started doing Docline, I learned that the more metadata I have, the easier my Docline request is going to go outside of Illiad. And then that Docline still remains valuable. For anyone who's not a Docline user, you don't have to be a medical school. When I left UNT Health to go back, so what I did was I was a library clerk at one place, got the library technician job at UNT Health, got my degree, no openings at UNT Health, went back to my previous institution that had an opening for an acquisitions librarian. And then when this position opened up, went back to UNT Health. So went back and forth a couple times. And while I was back at my previous institution, I signed them up for Docline. They're a community college, but they had a BSN in nursing. They have a nursing program. They have all their certificates almost are health science related. So, and almost all the ILLs they were getting requests for, health science related. So I signed them up for Docline. You don't have to be medical school to do it, So it's just one of those things where if you don't already have Docline, but you have medical health related stuff programs at your school, Docline's pretty useful, and even if you don't have Illiad, if you do, great, you have an integration you can use. If you don't, it's fine. The workaround's fine. I've not had an issue with it. I can attest WMS, but I know there are some ILSs that also have an ILL module. It probably will work about the same. All right, so future plans, we're just going to keep monitoring it. Is there ever going to be an integration? I don't know, but honestly, we're okay if there's not. But we monitor it and just see. And it also helps us to monitor anytime there's updates in either Tipasa or Docline too, because updates do change the functionality of our systems and our ILL. It also causes us to have to refine our documentation because we're pretty specific, and I'm a pretty specific person when it comes to following directions. So if anything in the interface has changed, we keep that ILL manual updated just in case. And we also have instructions for our unaffiliated users. So we have to update those instructions also anytime the interface changes. And so enhanced metadata use, making sure the staff is trained. And we haven't actually had to train anyone in a while because Sky's been doing ILL now since I left back in 2021. Maria, who is our half person, she's full-time, she just does ILL part of the time. She's been doing it since before Sky because she was always my backup. And so she's been doing Docline for years, and she was actually my backup for Illiad. So she was trained in Illiad too. And then there's me. I left, came back, I already knew the system. So we haven't actually had to train anyone new, but we know how important it is to make sure they are trained on this if that ever happens. We also use this for our patrons, especially our usual suspects, especially ones who are really bad at giving us full, or not even full, but just good citations. We tell them, if this article had if you had a PubMed ID on that, that'd make it even easier for us to find. So we use that too. And we try to tell our user experience librarians, hey, if you're doing a presentation on this, using the catalog, maybe include this too. Because our catalog, if you request directly from the catalog, a lot of the information is there, but not the PubMed ID. But a lot of people do it manually. And so we are missing stuff still. Evaluating automation options. Not an option for Docline at this point. I'm okay with that. We know that there are options within OCLC for Tipasa. Part of the reason we have not done that yet is we have one full-time staff, and that's the majority of his job. And like I told you, like 2,000 ILLs a year, half of which are actual ILLs. So we haven't needed to streamline anything with automation yet. We are looking at it, but it just hasn't happened yet. And then just engaging with the ILL community. I'm kind of hoping to do a similar presentation next year at SCC because I know a lot of those libraries are that niche category that this would be for because they're Illiad users and Docline users. And I know some of them have looked at migrating and they've held off migrating because they don't want to, lose the integration. Some of them are WMS customers. I'm like, It's not that hard, guys. Just pushing them in the right direction, which is part of, like I said, why I wanted to do this presentation, because it's not as scary as the original idea was, especially now that we've been doing it for so long. All right, so I apologize if I went over time on that. Are there any questions? I think I muted it. Push the button underneath.
You did mute it. Do you have the other hand? Okay, I have 2 online questions. The first is, I'm sorry if I missed this at the beginning. Why did you switch from Illiad to Tipasa?
We were WMS users. So we went from our original ILS system and we migrated to WMS in 2020. And part of it was because the migration idea had been in place for a couple of years now at UNT Health. They just hadn't actually followed through with it yet. And when I came in 2019 as a WMS user, I was like, yeah, let's do this. And then my old supervisor came in as the new electronic resources and acquisitions librarian, and she was going to be the one to oversee the whole migration. She came in as a WMS user. So it was one of those things where we were both WMS users. We had experience. We did do an RFP and look at other products, but WMS we're a small institution. It was only us using it. It made the most sense. So migrating from Illiad to Tipasa so that everything was basically under one umbrella also made more sense. So.
Great, I have another one. How are the analytics in Docline and in Tipasa?
So the analytics, I don't pull them myself, but I do look at them. So right now it's about, I don't think I went over this, it's about half, about 50-50, because I did look at them before coming to this conference to see where we're at. And I didn't include them because there was nothing spectacular to report. So when I pulled them and looked at the year, I actually went back to 2020, I think, 2021, because I just wanted to look. And first of all, the analytics are very easy to pull for both. They're not hard to pull at all. And Sky keeps them he combines them into one spreadsheet, but he keeps the spreadsheet separate, but it's half. When I looked at it, it's about 50% of our stuff goes through Docline and 50% goes through Tipasa. So we're not using one module or one ILL, module more than the other. We're using them equally.
Thank you. I have one more. At my library, we're waiting for Illiad to include Docline integration in their next few iterations when they change to web-based. We do not have WMS. The people here who are used to Illiad refuse to switch over because it lacks the Docline integration. What advice would you give?
Well, having someone who has experienced it have that conversation, honestly. And like I said, that's part of really why I've been trying to do this presentation, because I don't think there's enough people who've experienced the migration or experienced having to switch from Illiad to something else who have stuck with Docline. And so I think talking to someone who's experienced it, honestly, I got lucky that the institution I was at, there was nobody who had been there for a while and had been using Illiad for a while, that none of them had been. The person who trained me, he'd only been using Illiad for like 3 months. So there was nobody at our institution who were wholeheartedly trained on Illiad and had been using it for years. So we didn't have as much pushback. Like I said, our pushback actually came from outside libraries who were, concerned for us that we're leaving Illiad. What are you going to do? But like I said, we're still Docline, and we're still 50% of our stuff goes through Docline and 50% goes through Tipasa. So it's worked for us. But I think it has to do with getting someone to tell their experience I don't know if it'll help those people to budge, but we can be hopeful.
That's great. Thank you. All right. Okay, Megan, thank you so much. I'm a Docline user too at my institution, and it's pretty incredible. I also love that, yes, you don't have to be a medical library to participate, and you only need to have, I think, 10 holdings that you're willing to lend.
It's not bad.
And it's free to join.
Yes, free. And that was another concern I had with doing this presentation, because of what Docline is per the NLM. Is it still going to be relevant? And right now it still is relevant. And for the foreseeable future, I think it's still going to be relevant. Yeah. And I think a big part is there are a lot of hospitals. This is what they rely on for their ILL.
Absolutely.
And all that research, because the hospital that we work with, they do all their own ILL even though they're staffed by us, it doesn't run through me. They have their own ILL person, but that's what they rely on for that research if they don't have it in their holdings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
No, it's a pretty neat community. Thanks so much,
you're
Megan.
welcome.
Okay, thank you all for attending this session. Please complete the post-session survey in Whova, which you can access from this QR code or the link in the session chat. The link is also in the session description. The NWILL Planning Committee and our presenters appreciate your feedback. If you want to continue the conversation, you can use the chat within this session or the Whova community section. Thanks so much.